Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Fellowship of the Golden Age. And we're coming back now. And we're now going to be having special episodes of Fellowship of the Golden Age because there's just so many interesting things to discuss. So I've invited Kim back today to join us. And hi, Kim. Good to see you.
Hi.
And we're going to be discussing psychic projections. It's just something that been a lead I've been following a lot lately, and I really just want to explore this topic and get your take on it, Kim, and see where we go with this. And I feel like it's a very big topic, so it's worth sort of really nutting out. So I suppose why don't we start with if you could just describe like what you see a psychic projection is like.
Right. Well, for me, I remember as a child being very fascinated by Einstein and his whole E equals mc square. And when I got a little older, I came to understand that it really means that everything is energy. We think there's all this solid matter, but even matter is made out of energy. And when I found the spiritual path, I realized that beyond the physical body, we have an energy field. And I think most spiritual people are open to an aura around the physical body. And it's, of course, made up of energy. And the reason why that's important is that when I realized that I have this energy field, it became more easy to explain what I had experienced all of my childhood, namely what you call psychic projections. In other words, thoughts that were projected into my mind from an outside source.
Mm-hmm.
And if you only look at it materialistically, it's hard to explain. But when you realize everything is energy, we have an energy field around us, and that the mind really is an energy field, it becomes easy to understand how thoughts are actually energy waves. And these thoughts can then be projected from the outside into our minds, just like many other forms of energy. So I realized at that point that I had been exposed to these psychic projections my entire life, even from as far back as I can remember, because I was very sensitive to energy. And, I think beyond the physical senses, we all have whatever you want to call it, a sixth sense or intuition.
Mm-hmm.
So we can sense energy. And I certainly can see how during my childhood, I was very sensitive to this. For example, if other people were unhappy or in a bad mood, I was very sensitive to this. It could be my parents, it could be children at school. I remember sometimes there was children in my class that would be teased by others, and I could sense how bad they felt. But I could also sense there was darker energies in some places, and some people radiated a darker energy. So I think many spiritual people are, part of the reason why we're spiritual is that we have this, I mean, everybody has the sixth sense, but we have activated it probably in past lifetimes. So that means even as children, we are more sensitive to energy, and we don't understand what's happening. We don't receive any help to deal with it. What is this? If we try to tell our parents, oh, you're just imagining this. That's what my parents said. And so we become spiritual body because we want to understand our experience. And so it was very helpful for me to have a spiritual teaching that talked about this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why, I'm really trying to make sense of this now because there hasn't been an education behind this, a phenomenon that I've lived all my life, like not being able to, what's the word? Just balance the two, like the unsaid word and the said word, and there's no sort of particular leeway between that. So what would you say like is the difference? Like I'm aware that there's psychic projections that just come from regular people, and like the difference between them and psychic projections from non-physical beings like fallen entities and fallen beings.
Well, one of the consequences of realizing that everything is energy is that we realize that energy has different levels of vibration, different frequencies. So for me, for many years after I found the Ascended Master teachings, I was aware that our physical body is simply energy that vibrates in a certain spectrum. And beyond that, it's kind of like we have visible light and we have infrared light that's a lower energy. We have ultraviolet that's higher than what we can see with our eyes, but they're real. I mean, science has told us this. So beyond the physical body is the emotional body, which is our feelings. And beyond that, at a higher level, is the mental body, which is the level of our thoughts. And then the highest of the bodies we have, or the energy field, is the identity body. And then, of course, beyond that is the spiritual realm where our spiritual selves reside. So what we haven't been told as we were growing up is, in other words, there are four, we might call them parallel universes that make up our entire world: the physical, emotional, mental, and identity. And in each of these four levels, there are conscious beings. We are the conscious beings in the physical realm, but there are some in the emotional realm, some in the mental, and some in the identity. And what I realized when I found the Ascended Master teachings is that this entire energy field that we live in with these four levels is actually only sustained because there's a stream of energy coming from the spiritual realm, from the Ascended Masters. They are upholding our world by continuously streaming energy. And even science is beginning to see this now, that there is actually, the material universe is not a closed system, as materialism has been claiming for a couple hundred years. So in order to do anything, we need energy. And any being that's conscious needs energy. But the question is, where do we get it from? And so we human beings, we get it from the spiritual realm. It flows from the Ascended Masters to our higher self into our identity body, where we give it a certain form depending on how we see ourselves. Then it flows into the mental. We give it another form there based on the beliefs we have in our mental body. Then it flows into the emotional, and we give it a coloring or change the vibration there based on our feelings. And then we take physical action. So what is actually sustaining us is this constant flow. But it's possible that you can cut yourself off from this flow. So there are beings who have become so selfish, basically we can say, the more selfish you become, the more you reduce that flow. And so there are beings who have cut themselves off from the flow from the spiritual realm, but they still need energy. So where do they get energy from? They need to get it from the human beings who are still receiving it from the spiritual realm, meaning they need to steal our energy in order to survive. Then there are also some beings that are created over time by humankind collectively in especially emotional realm. We can call them entities or demons. And an example of this, for example, is there's an entity that wants people to smoke. So over time, people have fed their energy into this entity, and it has reached a certain level of strength where it can actually project thoughts and feelings into people's energy field, giving them a craving to smoke. So many people that smoke, it's like they will tell you that, oh, once in a while they just get this craving and they just have to light up. So this is because there's a projection of thoughts to smoke, and there's a projection of energy into the emotional body, or even a pull on the emotional body. And when you smoke, you give your energy to this entity, and therefore you sustain it, or you even help it grow bigger so it can influence more and more people. Same thing with alcohol, drugs, any kind of addiction. There's one of these mass entities behind it. And this is something, of course, we weren't told in school, but we really should have been told.
Would you say that, so like when I've been a teacher for quite a long time, and I taught mainstream children, and I found, and then in the end I ended up teaching a lot children more on the spectrum, autistic spectrum children. And I found it much easier to teach those children because they wouldn't lie. And whereas the mainstream children had this sort of almost learnt ability to lie and be deceptive about their behaviour. So I'm just wondering, where if psychic projections were coming in there, it was very difficult as a teacher to sort of sort out some sort of a social issue when I've got a child sort of saying one thing to me, but then, psychically, like there's just a different story going on. Would you describe, would you say that's in the line of psychic projections too, or?
It could be, because obviously there is one of these collectively created entities about lying. And I think depending on the culture, many children are vulnerable to this. They start lying and then they can't really stop themselves. It's like one lie leads to another. And it also depends a little bit on the culture, because in some cultures, it can be, there can be this projection of guilt, which can be from another one of these entities, that you feel guilty if you've done something wrong. And so you don't want to get caught doing something wrong. So children get into playing this game, that they don't want to admit to what they've done. So they get into lying to avoid being found out or being confronted. And so they avoid feeling guilty about it. And this is part of what happens. I mean, we've also talked about it when we talk about separate selves or subconscious selves, where you can have these cells that are pulling you in opposite directions. And this then makes you vulnerable to these projections from the outside. So I think there is definitely a connection there.
Yeah. So like a collective energy that's projecting this, that's a normality. It's a normal behavior to cover up a behavior.
Yeah, and I also think, these children that you are dealing with in school, they were probably projecting some psychic projections at you to get you to believe them.
Yeah.
And not confront them, So they were, in a sense, trying to control you psychically. See, you were talking earlier about the difference between the spoken word and the unspoken word. And so what we can basically say is, when we realize everything is done with energy, right? We realize that at the surface level, conscious level, we are hearing words from another person. But when those words are spoken, there is an energy message encoded in the words that are also projected at your emotional and mental body.
Yeah.
For example, the children lying, what are they projecting into you? Well, first of all, they're projecting doubt into your mental mind. So you don't know what's true and false. You can't tell who's lying and who's not lying, right? So that gives you a certain sense of doubt. And then they might be projecting at you, you should be sympathetic to them because they are such nice children. And that's pulling on your emotional body. And I'm not saying people are doing this consciously or maliciously, but they can grow up in a culture where it just becomes normal. Everybody's lying to avoid being confronted, and everybody is doing things that they know they shouldn't be doing, and they can't stop themselves from doing it because teasing other children, for example, has just become, it's just part of the culture. I remember when I was a child, bullying back in the 1960s when I went to school, that was just normal behavior. And there wasn't the awareness of it that there is today, where in Danish schools today, bullying is heavily discouraged, and often those who try to tease others are confronted with it. But that didn't happen when I was a child. So there was a certain culture there, that, this is what some people, they thought it was just fun to tease others. And the teachers didn't do anything about it unless it got really extreme.
Yeah. But, still you do see a lot in a lot of schools and the social behaviours around the world where it's very, very common for people to sort of, cover up, and there's just like this discrepancy between what's coming out through the spoken word and then the psychic projection is totally different. So, you can say, are you angry with me? And the person's like, no, but you know full well they're furious with you.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's common in many cultures. It just, depending on the culture, it's just there's a facade that you put on. There's a certain behavior that everybody does. For example, very common in Danish culture, for example, to use humor. You come up with a quick answer. You make fun of this or that or situations. And when I was in my youth, I did that all the time. And my brain is very, very quick, so I can very quickly come up with some kind of answer that's funny. And in my late 20s, I suddenly had an epiphany. One day I realized, but I'm just using humor to hide myself. Because this is what I learned as a child. Of course, there were children that were trying to tease me. But I very quickly learned that if I didn't take it seriously, if I joked with them instead of being feeling sad about being teased, if I just cracked a joke, they would leave me alone. So it became a defense mechanism. And at some point I realized, but this is actually preventing me from having a deeper conversation with people. Because I'm always hiding behind this facade of humor. And I'm really afraid to expose myself and be genuine, just say what I actually feel. Because you in this environment where you're constantly exposed to being teased, you can't say what you feel because they're going to exploit it to tease you with it. So I'm just saying, in every culture, there's this certain facade that's created, a certain behavior that people learn. And, that means that you have the facade and then you have the underlying current, which is the psychic projections. And, you can see people who bully other children, for example, they're also psychically projecting into these other children that they should submit to this. And many children build this, you have to submit. And, you might build this pattern when you are just 5, 7 years old. And then later, as an adult, you carry it with you. So when you're exposed to a bully at work, for example, you react like a 7-year-old, which of course isn't very constructive. But that's because you created now this subconscious self, or this pair of subconscious selves that was created to deal with an older child bullying you. And whenever you're exposed to the same psychic projection, the self is activated. And now it takes over your emotional and mental body, and you're just reacting through the self instead of being conscious and saying, I'm an adult human being. Do I really need to let this guy bully me?
Would you say, like, that there'd be a bit of a pattern with parents and children? Like, parents actually, I just can almost see it now, like parents projecting, psychically projecting, how they want their children's lives to. Yeah, that definitely happens.
Of course, it can. Yeah. Depending on the culture, because in some cultures it's much, much stronger. I think it was a year ago, I talked to a man from Argentina. And in Argentina, their culture is that you are almost, as a child, you're almost a slave of your parents, because you have to take care of your parents. You have to obey your parents. There's a Catholic culture. And, he was describing how his mother had been projecting psychic energy at him his whole life to get him to submit to her and basically be her servant, even as an adult. So he felt like he didn't really have an adult life because he was still supposed to be, he had this very heavy projection from his mother to be subservient to his mother. And so this is a culture that's much stronger than when I grew up in Denmark, where parents, it's not nearly as strong. But there's, of course, still, my parents had a very strong sense of how I should behave as their child. My mother, for example, she never said this directly, but I can look back and see that the worst thing that I could do, and basically the only thing that I wasn't allowed to do as a child, was to embarrass my mother in a public setting by, for example, acting out or crying or whatever. So I could see that whenever I was with my mother in a public setting, I better be on my best behavior. And this was a clear, psychic projection, which no doubt she had taken over from her parents. who might have taken it over from their parents. And this is how the sins of the fathers are visited upon the third and fourth generation.
Yeah.
It's just a pattern. It's just carried on in the culture. And you
Yeah.
can easily, of course, take that on, and then you're doing the same thing to your children. But this is a very big dilemma, because obviously, as a parent, you need to set boundaries for your children. It is your role as a parent to say, you cannot behave this way, because I have seen children, especially back in the 60s and 70s, their parents didn't discipline them at all. There was a certain group of people in Denmark back then who believed, oh, you shouldn't discipline children. And these children couldn't function in a social setting because they were not used to the fact that you have to actually consider other people.
Mm-hmm.
They just grew up thinking, oh, it's only me. I'm the center of the universe. I can do whatever I want. And nobody they couldn't understand why they were lonely later in life, right? But nobody wanted to be around them because they were basically narcissists. They were intolerable, insufferable. I mean, totally egotistical. So as a parent, you have to set certain boundaries. And what do you do to get the children to follow that? Well, you project with your mind, your emotional and your mental mind. That's just what you do. But there is, of course, a line there where you can say, when is it just part of parenting, and when does it become, too much? When does it become actually controlling behavior?
Yeah. Like, I was adopted, and I was told I was adopted, so that was never a lie for me. But the projection I always had, which was, don't talk about it. Like, my mother did not want to meet, and I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to express my feelings, and there was so much going on, but it really it caused a lot of trauma that couldn't be resolved until long after she was dead. And
yeah.
And I have heard a lot about, that there's a lot of adopted people who they weren't actually even told, that, but they knew their whole lives that, that, I know I was adopted, and then they discover later on. So we can't hide any of this from anyone. You can run. Yeah.
No,
so
and that's, I think that's an important point there, in the sense that children who are spiritually inclined, as I said, is because we're sensitive. So we sense if there's something in our family that's hidden. We don't know what it is with their surface mind, but we sense there's something. My parents had certain things they never told me about when I was a child. But I sensed there was something in my family that wasn't talked about. And I think a lot of children have that.
Did you find out what it was?
Yeah. As an adult, I was finally told.
Okay.
But I'm just saying, I think a lot of families are like that. You have certain skeletons in the closet that are not talked about, but the children sense there is something going on.
Like, even when parents are having issues and they're trying to keep it private from the child.
Well, yeah, that too. Yeah, that too.
Yeah. So, where is this? That, would you say that? Look, wait on. Let's just go back a moment. So, as I understand it, with psychic projections, like, that's the worst kind of karma that you can make, is if you're projecting into somebody else's mind, what you think they should do. Like, even worse than physically affecting their lives, like if you're psychically affecting them, that's considered to be the worst karma. Like, could you elaborate on that a little bit, like with the karma part of it?
Well, the Ascended Masters don't follow the traditional Eastern view of karma, where karma is only action. So they are saying that you make karma with all of your 4 lower bodies, because karma is really what energy are you projecting out. And you are, of course, not just taking a physical action, you're also projecting through the emotional body, the mental, and the identity body. And karma really relates to free will. So how much do you violate people's free will with what you're doing? And if you're taking a physical action, of course, an extreme action is killing somebody, but you can take other physical actions that hurt other people that are not as extreme. But the thing is, when you're doing something physically, people notice it. They know what you're doing. And therefore, they have at least the option to defend themselves or to remove themselves. But if you are projecting psychically, trying to control people psychologically, they may not realize what you're doing. But this is violating their free will in a deeper way, because they don't know what's happening, so they can't defend themselves, or they can't say no, basically, as easily. And that's why, manipulating other people's free will is really a very, very severe form of manipulation, worse than physical manipulation.
Yeah, and I suppose in its most extreme form, like you could probably call it black magic, right?
Yes, you can call it that, and it's been called that. I mean, and you could say the parents who are projecting emotional and mental energy into their children's minds in order to set healthy boundaries for their children, it's not really creating any severe karma.
Mm.
But if you get to a point where you really want to control people, like this man from Argentina, I would say his mother was using black magic to control him. Mm-hmm. Where you are maliciously or deliberately trying to control other people, for example, making them feel guilty or whatever, this could be considered a form of black magic.
Really? So even like what you'd call emotional blackmail, that's sort of what I would have called it. I wouldn't have gone as full on
but
as black magic.
It's black, right? So
yeah, wow.
How do you blackmail? You use black magic in the sense that
oh yeah, blackmail.
Yeah, you are deliberately and very aggressively trying to get other people to feel that they have chosen to do this, but you are manipulating them. So in their minds, I had no other option. I mean, look at how many people commit a crime, for example, and say, it was my only choice. I had no other choice. Mm. But you always have choices. It's just you can't see them because your mind has been manipulated. So you are so focused on just one thing that you think this is the only option. And that is definitely a form of black magic when you manipulate people into a situation like that, where they feel they're in a crisis situation, for example. I feel they can't stand being in the situation. They have to do something to get some kind of relief. And suddenly the only thing they can see is to kill themselves or to kill somebody else or do something else that's very extreme. And it's obviously black magic because you are deliberately getting people to do this, partly to control them, partly to destroy their spiritual potential, or maybe just to steal their energy.
Yeah. And the effects are massive. Like I knew a woman many years ago, and she very consciously performed like black magic rituals against her husband, who she was, divorcing from. And I'm not sure exactly what she was wishing for, but she was wishing him harm. And I ran into him a few years later, and we were just talking, and he just said to me, just in passing, he said, yeah, he just seems to have had this incredible run of having all of these car accidents. And I was like, oh, whoa, like, it really did have an effect on his life.
Yeah, I mean, the extreme example of this is these voodoo dolls where people put needles into to harm another person. And I'm not really a big believer in voodoo, but I'm not saying it doesn't have some effect. But I actually think it's not the doll. I actually think it's that people are in their minds, they are having an image of the person and they are projecting emotional and mental energy, maybe even identity level energy into people's subconscious minds. And this is what causes things to manifest in people's lives.
Yeah, it was like pure hatred. It was just hatred. That's,
yeah. And it can obviously have an effect on people. And then if you take this to this is at a purely personal level where people do all these kind of things to each other. But then if you take it to a bigger level, like we talked about, there are these beings in the emotional, mental, and identity realms that want to control human beings. And the Ascended Masters have given a lot of teachings on that. But let's just say that there are beings who want to prevent us, who are spiritual people, from fulfilling our spiritual goal. if you're a spiritual person, you have what I call a life plan or divine plan, where before you come into this embodiment, you meet with your spiritual teachers and you define some goals for what kind of growth you want to achieve in terms of your psychology, but also what kind of a gift you want to bring to the world. And so when you come into embodiment, we forget this and we have to reconnect to it intuitively, usually, one step at a time. We don't see it all at once. But that's why many spiritual people have this sense there's a purpose. There's something we are here to do. There's something we're here to find. And there are these beings in these higher realms that deliberately want to sabotage us from fulfilling these goals that we have defined because it's a threat to them. Because the entire planet is in this process of being raised up from a point, if you go back, where these darker beings, they had almost total control of humankind. And now they have much less control today, and their control is dropping all the time, but it can only drop when there are some people who individually raise their consciousness and pull up on a collective. So the spiritual people become a threat to these dark forces. And therefore they will do everything they can to prevent you from fulfilling the goals in your divine plan, meaning that you actually, they are trying to project these psychic projections into your mind that give you doubt, that cause you emotional problems. And what they are really trying to do is put you in what I call a spiritual or psychological catch-22, where you have a spiritual or a psychological issue that you can't resolve. And so all of your energy, all of your attention is focused on your own psychology. You never get to the point where you can actually do something for the world.
Yeah, and that's where I'm beginning to see that it's a crucial point here of A, being able to discern these psychic projections, and B, like resolving the selves that allow these psychic projections to affect. Because what I'm discovering through my own journey is that the more I've put myself out in public, the more projections that come, because you're not necessarily in contact with all these people, but there's a lot of energy being directed from, often totally faceless people, even like, people I wouldn't even know, but, from people I know also. So I would imagine that as you sort of began, you've been on your journey of actually, putting yourself out in the world. So could you describe a bit about, your own experience with dealing with the psychic projections that would have been coming, like what's that like? And then B, like, how did you go about actually transcending and resolving the selves that react to these? It's kind of big, this topic, but yeah, let's see where we go with it.
Well, as I said, I was always very sensitive to energy. I just didn't know what it was. So when I found the Ascended Master teachings, I realized what it was, that there are these forces that are projecting psychic projections into my mind. So knowing this is the first step, because then you know what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
So you can sense something as a child, but you don't really know what it is, right? You have the old, many children are afraid of the dark. But why are we afraid of the dark? Because we sense there's some kind of energy being projected at us, and we don't know what it is. So when you know what it is, that's a very, very big step. And that's why I say we really should have been taught this in school, so we could defend ourselves. But anyway, so here we are adults, and we find a spiritual path, and now we realize there is these projections and where they're coming from. So the first step after I found the Ascended Master teachings was, of course, I learned that we can invoke spiritual light from the Ascended Master. We can invoke a shield. And this is, again, ties in with energy. We have this energy field, and it vibrates at a certain level. But we can invoke a shield of higher frequency, spiritual energy around our energy field, so these lower energies can't penetrate. And this is especially Archangel Michael, who is very, very powerful for doing that. The Ascended Masters have the power to turn back any lower energy. Because you have to realize this, a higher energy cannot be affected by a lower energy. So the ascended masters have all the power that is needed for us to be totally protected. They could, for that matter, wipe out all dark forces on Earth in a split second. But because of free will, they aren't allowed to do this, because we human beings have either created or magnetized these dark forces, and it has to be allowed to outplay until we voluntarily say we've had enough. So this is the one thing you can do. You become aware of these sources. You can say, enough, I don't want these. I am deciding consciously that I do not want these projections anymore. And then you back it up by invoking light from Archangel Michael. And I did this, I think in 1984, I started really doing this. And then there was also a recommendation. There's another ascended master called the Elohim Estrella, who can cut you free from any ties you have to lower force. And then the third factor is that you can use violet flame energy to transmute lower energies that are already in your energy field. Because we didn't talk about this, but what can happen is that if you go into fear and you spend a lot of time in fear, part of this fear-based energy accumulates in your emotional body. And it becomes a magnet that opens you up to projections of fear from the outside. Because basically you can say, how can these outside forces project anything into your mind? Only if you have something in your mind that they can interact with.
Yeah.
Jesus said it 2,000 years ago, the prince of this world cometh and has nothing in me. So only if you have a certain fear in your emotional body, they can magnify that fear, or it becomes an open door for them to project more energy. So it becomes a downward spiral. And so you can invoke the violet flame energy to transform that fear-based energy. So I started doing this in 1984. And all of my childhood, it had taken me over 2 hours to fall asleep every night, because I had all of these projections, thoughts, feelings. Whatever I had encountered during the day, it was magnified. And it was just my thoughts were just going around and around and around. And after I had been using these decrees for 2 to 3 months, it suddenly hit me one day, I'm falling asleep within 15 minutes now. So that was a very, very clear, tangible indication that this was working. Because the only thing I'd done differently was doing these decrees. And it was clearly working. But then, of course, and so this is one thing you can do that's very tangible, very practical. And I have met other people who had various psychological problems, had various psychic predictions. And once they started invoking the protection and the other energies, they felt a clear improvement. But then in the long run, it's really about realizing what is it in you that makes you vulnerable to these energies. And that is, as we talked about, the subconscious selves. Yeah. Because there has to be something in you. You could basically you can say the law of free will is quite clear. And the law of free will works in a certain way in the physical realm, because you can go up to somebody physically and slap them on one cheek, and they can't stop you from doing this. This is a physical action. But when it comes to the emotional, mental, and identity bodies, you ideally have control over what you allow to enter there. So nothing can enter unless you allow it to happen. This doesn't mean you do it consciously, but it means there's something, for example, in your emotional body that makes you feel that if your mother is shaming you because you did something, you should accept the blame. You should feel that blame and take in the energy. And we have all of these subconscious selves, they are openings for these lower energies because we somehow think we should take them in. And so the longer process of freeing yourself from this is to unravel all of these. And so I didn't have the concept of the subconscious selves in the 1990s, but I realized that my psychology and resolving my psychology was really more important than doing the decrees.
Yeah, yeah.
There actually came a point where I realized that I couldn't go further on the path by just doing decrees. I had to work on my psychology. So I worked on my psychology very intensively during the 1990s. And then in 2002, I started doing the work for Jesus, when you were asking about what happened there. And so all of a sudden, I go from being an anonymous person to now I'm creating these websites and publishing books and doing conferences where I'm standing in front of a group of people. And if I had not been prepared, if I had not known what I was dealing with, it probably would have knocked me over. I probably wouldn't have been able to handle the intensity of the projections against me. But because I knew it, because I had resolved some of the psychology, because I was invoking protection, it was just, I just noticed an increase in intensity of these projections. And there have, of course, after a while, you adjust to it and it doesn't bother you. You can live with it. It sort of goes in the background. But it is always there, and it has been there ever since. And there are periods where it's more intense than others. After I started doing the YouTube videos a little over a year ago, I could feel an uptick in projections. Yeah. Because now I'm not just out there on a website. Now I'm there as a human being. I'm talking, and people can see me in a more direct way. So obviously, I have felt that. And so, but when you know what it is, it's just a matter of adjusting to it and deciding, first of all, that what I decided many years ago was the dark forces are not going to get me. They are not going to derail me from my divine plan. They are not going to stop me from doing what I'm here to do, what I have the potential to do. I'm not going to let them. I may have done it in past lives, I don't know, but I was definitely determined it's not going to happen this lifetime. And so I realized also at the early stage that the only way they can really affect me is that they have something in me.
Yep.
And so that's where you have to constantly look at your reaction, your psychology. Number of years ago, 2009, I divorced my second wife, and she tried for a while to do all kinds of things publicly on the internet, but really there was also from her and a small group of people around her very, very severe psychic projections against me to basically derail me, stop me from doing whatever I was doing. And I had to look at that back then and say, okay, why am I reacting to this? Why do I feel? What is it I feel? Do I feel like I should take this in, that I should take this seriously? And one of the things that there were many things I realized in my psychology, but one of the things was that they were making, my ex-wife was making all kinds of accusations against me. And I realized at an early point I couldn't respond to it because it would just be a black hole. It would just be he said, she said, and it would just be, it could go on indefinitely, which is essentially is what she wanted and what the dark forces wanted, to draw me into this. And so when she realized I wasn't responding, she started putting out more and more made up stuff. I mean, completely made up. You had done this, you had done that. I was this kind of person, I was that kind of person. And so I realized that I had a self in me that wanted to answer this, wanted to refute what was obviously so wrong, because I had a self that was attached to being seen as a good person by other people. And I had to simply look at this and work through this and get to a point where I could say, but people have their free will. So if they want to look at me a certain way, I just have to let them. There's nothing I could say anyway, because these people didn't believe anything I would say. But I also had to realize that if I'm respecting their free will to look at me any way they want, I also have to respect my own free will, because I have a right to say, I don't have to be affected by how other people look at me and what they are projecting at me. I have a right to be who I am. I am not interfering with their right to be who they are. Even if they want to go into this entirely negative spiral of demonizing another human being, which is what they were doing, I have to say, okay, I have to respect their right to do this, but I also have to respect my own right that I am not derailing my life plan because somebody else doesn't like what I'm doing. So I have a right to be myself. And that was a very important shift for me. And I realized that the only way I could do this was to be completely not attached to other people's opinion about me and let them form whatever opinion they wanted to form. And just say, that's fine, they can have that. But I don't have to be affected by it. I don't have to let that affect me. I have a right to live my life.
The key, like, you know, just that, you know, you have a right to be yourself. Like, I think, you know, as I'm sort of looking at it in myself, like, it's basically, yeah, you know, people can sort of think and project anything they want, and I can have all my different reactions to that. But I have a right to be myself. I have a right to express myself as I want, because it's at this key point, you know, when you start to step out and express your Christhood, that, you know, this has to be really fully resolved. Like, I'm fine with stepping out and expressing myself. That's absolutely fine. But it's just when these projections are coming back that, you know, there are some reactions still. Like, I'm picking up on it, and I think the main one that affects me is, like, I feel like I start looking to see where I went wrong. Like, I'm seeing some sort of failure in myself, that I must have done something wrong, because that's what the projections are sort of saying. Like, you know, I could have done this better or that better. And but really, when it comes down to it, like, even if I did do something wrong, like, does it really matter? Like, I have a right to make mistakes.
Right. But
Yeah.
if you look at that reaction there,
Yeah.
I mean, it's very common, of course. I used to do the same thing, but I'm just saying, what did I do wrong? If you look deeper and go behind it, the projection that's coming at you, it's not just that you did something wrong, but you are wrong.
Yeah.
You have no right to be here. You have no right to do what you're doing. It's okay if you're sitting in your little camper down in Australia being anonymous. But when you start expressing yourself publicly, you are wrong for doing this. And this ties in with my avatar videos, where I say that most spiritual people came from a natural planet to Earth. And we came to hold the balance against these very negative beings who have gone into negativity. And you just look at this on Facebook, for example, or YouTube. When you get these negative comments, some comments are just hateful, right? So you have to ask yourself, why is there suddenly a person who's posting this very negative, very hateful comment to a person that they don't know, they have never met? You are just trying to put something out there to help other people, right? There's 1 billion videos on YouTube, right? So if a person doesn't like your video, just click off it and find another one among the 1 billion videos that you want to watch. But the person has to find your video, then have to give a negative comment on it. Why is that? Is that really just the person? Or is it because this person's mind is open to these darker forces, who's just using that person as a tool to try and derail you? Because, see, it's this, you know, you have this, you have kind of like the two models for spiritual teachers. There's the Buddha, who sits in his Sangha and lets the students come to him. And then there's the Christ, who goes out in the busy highways and challenges people directly. And the dark forces can handle it if you're sitting in a cave in the Himalayas. That's not, they don't really want it, but it's not a direct threat to them. But once you go out publicly and demonstrate that you are on the spiritual path, there's an alternative to the normal state of awareness where people are controlled by the dark forces, you become a direct threat to them, and they will attack you with everything they've got. And they will use other people whose minds are so open to these darker forces that they can be taken over by them.
And this is affecting so many, loads and loads of ascended master students. You know, as I reach out to people constantly, inviting for to join for an interview, many people go through the same a fear of, like, taking that step to expressing. Like, once people go over that hump, it's a huge healing, because, you know, it's rising up to the challenge of the Christ. But Yeah, there's a lot of people who hold back and can't resolve this because, and it's understandable, like, and that's one of the reasons why I'm wanting to talk about this. And so I wonder if you can give any, any knowledge or advice to help people to rise above
Yeah, it
that
is
fear.
understandable. And I have, in my videos about the avatar psychology, I've talked about this dynamic. That when we first came to Earth in a past lifetime, we were often exposed to this very direct attack by the dark beings. And this created this wound, the cosmic burst trauma, as the masters call it. And we have all these teachings, the book Healing Your Spiritual Traumas, that are aimed at helping people heal this. But as long as you haven't healed it, you will be afraid to step out. But even if you heal it, there's still a decision you have to make. And that's why I'm saying that there came a point where I realized that these dark forces wanted to stop me from manifesting my divine plan. And I wasn't going to let them. And you have to make that decision. But I'm not saying you can just make it with the outer mind. It's one of those things. There's always an interactive process in your mind, and this is what a lot of spiritual students don't really get. They think you can walk the path with the outer mind. This is what I call the outer path, where you think you just do things and you don't have to look at your psychology. But really, it's an interaction. You can make a decision. Like I made a decision with my outer mind many years ago to give these decrees regularly for protection. But after some time, what I needed to do was back up that decision by resolving the psychology. So I no longer needed the same degree of protection because I wasn't as vulnerable anymore. So there's always this interaction. That's why I'm saying you can't just decide with the outer mind, oh, the dark force is not going to get me. You also have to look at what is it makes me vulnerable to these attacks? Why do I doubt myself? And basically, you could say that what happened was when we came to Earth as avatars and were attacked by the dark forces, what they did was to make us doubt. Why did we come here? Do I have a right to be here? Do I have a right to do anything? Do I have a right to challenge these dark beings? Do I have the right to challenge people on Earth who just want to live the way they've always lived? Do I even have a right to be here? And so you have to look at what did you come to believe? What belief did you take on? And I can see for me, for example, it was very much tied into this free will because I was always so afraid of hurting other people's feelings or manipulating people or forcing them. I didn't want to do this because I see so much of this on the planet. And I see that's one of the big problems on the planet. There's this group of people who want to force others. So I don't want to do that. But it got to a point where I doubted my right to challenge people and to show them there's an alternative to the normal state of consciousness that people are in. And it prevented me from, stepping out and declaring who I am and what I'm here for. And what I didn't realize was that this is actually not respecting people's free will, because people have a right to be in whatever state of consciousness they're in for a time, but they don't have the right to be in that state of consciousness indefinitely. That's why Jesus appeared. That's why he walked out among the people. That's why he challenged the scribes and the Pharisees and challenged people. Because Jesus, by just walking around and demonstrating that he had reached a higher level of consciousness, this was enormously challenging to the ordinary people who lived their lives the way their parents did and could only see that this is the only way to live life. So what I'm saying is people have a right to live that way for a time, but there comes a point where they have a right to be challenged. They have a right to be shown there's an alternative to this sleepwalking through life that they're doing. It's the same thing with the Buddha. In a sense, you could say he was challenging people with the Four Noble Truths, where people at the time, and even today, they're not thinking that life is suffering because they're just so used to it. I mean, you look at human beings, right? No animal species can live in as many different environments as human beings can because we are so adaptable. And that's a blessing and a curse, because the curse is we can get used to many different conditions. So we get used to living a life in a low state of consciousness. So we actually have a right to be shown that there's an alternative. There's a higher state of consciousness. So
Mm.
Jesus had a right to go out there and challenge people, and we do too. And as Jesus has said in the book, The Mystical Teachings of Jesus, there are 10,000 people in embodiment right now who have a potential to manifest their full Christhood. There are millions more who have a potential to manifest a high degree of Christ. But Christhood that isn't expressed isn't really Christhood.
Yeah.
So what we are here to do is to demonstrate there's an alternative to the normal, what we in the reality simulator can call immersion, where you're totally immersed, you think this is the only way to live life. And we have a right to be here, and we have a right to demonstrate that. Not that we need to go out and psychically project at people, but we have a right to at least demonstrate through example. I'm not living the way ordinary people are living. So what I didn't realize is that by being passive, by not wanting to challenge people, I was actually not respecting their free will.
Mm. Mm.
Because the law of free will says you can make any choice you want, but you can always change the previous choice by making a more aware choice. But if you think that you are bound by your previous choices, in other words, you grow up in a certain environment, you think this is the only way to live, you don't really have a choice anymore. And unless someone demonstrates to you that you can live a different way than the way your parents and grandparents have been living, you can't really choose a different way. You are just mindlessly taking over what you saw as you were growing up, thinking this is the only way. And that's why, the Ascended Masters have a right to send spiritual teachers. And the problem in the past is that they have sent one teacher, which people then idolize. And that's why in this age, the idea is they're sending tens of thousands of spiritual teachers, so they can't idolize all of them.
Yeah.
We're here to be examples.
And so when we send out that challenge to somebody else, the thing is, we're not actually challenging that person, we're challenging their separate selves. So it's almost like, shaking that consciousness out of them.
Yeah. I mean, the separate selves are actually, that's actually what's taking away people's free will.
Mm.
Because as long as they're trapped in a separate self, they can't see there's an alternative. There's a different way to live, there's a different way to react to situations. And you could say that most people, 95% or more of the people on Earth, are so heavily trapped in these psychic projections coming from their culture, other people around them, from the dark forces, the mass consciousness, that they don't have a choice to how to live. They can't make a choice. They can't choose an alternative. They can only mindlessly continue doing what they were brought up to do. So you're actually, by demonstrating there's an alternative, you're actually reactivating their free will. Now they have a choice. They can see there's an alternative.
Mm. Mm.
And that's what I realized. And when I realized that, it was like I overcome this doubt that do I really have a right to be doing what I'm doing? And I realized, yes, I do.
And because we could almost get caught up in almost like a benign psychic projection by withholding what the Christ wants to speak through us, but we're still thinking and we're still seeing something in that person. So we're actually projecting something, but we're not giving them something concrete that they can work with. There's going to be a discrepancy in our energy field, and we're no better than the other psychic projections.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So what about like benign psychic projections? Like,
well,
would you say they're benign?
In a sense, you could say, is there such a thing as a benign projection? I was just using the example of the parents. You have to set some kind of boundaries for your children. But then when they grow up and they become adults, you should stop. And most parents, of course, don't do that. So you could say, when the children are young, it serves a purpose. But when they become older, then it really becomes black magic, where the parents want the children to live a certain way. I mean, I have an aunt, for example, who is a very sweet person, a very nice person, but she has a very fixed image of how her two sons should live their lives. And they don't really realize that, but I can see it. I mean, it's not that it's malicious or anything. She wants them to do well. as she sees it. And my parents, for example, they also had a benign psychic projection that they wanted me to do well. But becoming a spiritual person and moving to the United States and start publishing books and websites, this was not on their radar screen. So they couldn't even conceive of this. And I can see my family members today, the few that are still alive, they don't even understand what I'm doing. They haven't really looked into what I'm doing because they just don't want to know. It's too far beyond their sense of normalcy. So that's why I'm saying, many parents, when the children become adults and they should really start working on their divine plan, the parents still want to hold the children within the parameters of what they think is a good life. And is it then benign anymore?
So would you say that there's some sort of a line to draw between like psychic projections and judgments, or are they pretty much the same thing?
Well, yeah, I would say that a judgment is something you make in your mind. And then based on a judgment, you then create a psychic projection that you project at people. At the judgment is just an evaluation, for example, at the mental level, where you have a certain standard, and then you judge, he or she is doing something wrong. But then the question is, once you have made that judgment, what are you then going to do to try and get the person to conform to it? And that can then become a psychic projection. So I would say that the judgment itself, you're talking about people judging others.
Yeah.
Or are you talking about, so judging others this is based on how you see life, how you see that, basically, how should a human being behave according to you, your vision, your culture, whatever. And so then you judge, Neptune shouldn't be doing this. She's doing something wrong. But the question is, how aggressive do you then become in projecting in order to get you to conform to their vision? Or their judgment.
But isn't even just thinking that thinking Neptune's doing something wrong, isn't even that like immediately becoming a psychic projection?
For most people it is, yes, because they don't even realize they're judging. They are just so caught up in this, everybody should live according to the standard in our culture. And see, this is part of what I was touching upon it a little bit before, because what the dark forces have done is they have created this standard. And the standard is you should be a normal human being. You should not have any kind of higher awareness or Christhood, or you should not express this. You should just live like a normal human being. And they are trying to get everybody to conform to that. And, we really, as spiritual people, we have to come to a point where we see this and we decide consciously, deliberately, I'm not going to conform to this. I guess you're in Australia because there was a kangaroo that hopped by outside your window.
Yeah, they rule around here.
That's something you see every day in my part of the world.
It's pretty normal here. I don't know.
Yeah. You don't even blink an eye.
Yeah.
So the darker forces are always projecting at us that we should not be spiritual. That's the underlying projection. We should not threaten them. Because they have most of humanity in their control, because people are so burdened by these psychic projections, they can't see beyond certain boundaries.
So I guess it just comes back to, knowing within the self that, I have a right to be who I am. I have a right to express myself as I so choose. And like, I'm just sort of gleaning that for myself and for others who are just, in this point of, it's time for me to begin expressing myself. And so how do I rationalize the two? How do I balance out the attacks and the judgments and transcend it?
Yeah, you have to make that decision. And that's why the trick of the dark forces has always been, you have the Buddha. He stands out. He reaches a higher state of consciousness. Then you have Jesus. reaches a higher state of consciousness. What have the dark forces done with those two? They have idolized them, put them up there on the pedestal. They were so special. That's why they could manifest a higher state of consciousness. But you can't, because when you were born, there weren't a star over your birthplace, and there weren't 3 wise men appearing with gifts and this and that. But in reality, the Buddha and Jesus and many other spiritual teachers were meant to be examples. And the motto of the Ascended Masters is, what one has done, all can do. So that's what the Ascended Masters are trying to help us see, that we can all raise our consciousness. Doesn't matter who we are, what mistakes we've made, we can all raise our consciousness. And that's what is constantly being projected at us when we try to step outside the mold of our society, projected by the dark forces. Oh, you don't have a right to be different. You don't have a right to do this. There's something wrong with you. And there's also this standard that in order to do something, oh, you should be perfect before you do anything, because otherwise you'll be criticized. And it's perfectly true, you will be criticized. But the thing is, no matter how perfect you were, you are going to be criticized by the dark forces when they see you as a threat. Why? Because, as I've explained in many of my videos, in the duality consciousness, you can criticize anything. Anything can be criticized. So you have to realize, when you step out publicly, doesn't matter what you do, or how perfect you think you're doing it, you will be criticized. Because there will be somebody who will take the duality consciousness, twist what you're doing. I mean, just look at the presidential debate in the United States right now, where it's just a matter of how can you cast doubt upon the other candidate. And in the duality consciousness, you can always find something. So when you decide to step out, you just have to realize people will criticize you. And you just have to deal with it and say, but I have a right to be myself, because there is nothing wrong with me. I had years in the late 1990s where I had this, I first realized I don't accept myself. I don't accept myself for who I am and my right to be here. I was always looking for, how could I change myself? What do I need to overcome in my psychology? And it's fine. You have to go through, you have to be willing to look at yourself, but you can't go so far that you're suddenly not accepting yourself. So I had a period where I used it as a mantra. I used this, there is nothing wrong with me. Because that was the projection I was dealing with at the time. You're wrong. There's something wrong with you. You are a fundamentally flawed being. And of course, behind that were some cells that needed to be dealt with at some point. But still, it was helpful for me to, whenever I felt that projection, and this can be another thing you can do about projections. When you become aware there's a certain projection that's coming at you, you create this mantra that counteracts it, like, there is nothing wrong with me. And it can help you. I mean, it's not saying it resolves the self, but it can help you deal with the projection when it's very intense. So what I'm saying is that you just have to accept this, that some people will feel threatened by what you do or say, and they will try to attack you just to put you down. Or maybe to make themselves feel superior to you because they've come up with this hateful argument, whatever. So you have to realize, and it could be, for me, it was helpful to realize that in one way, I want to think the best about people, right? So I want to think that people are basically good. But it came to me at some point, I just had to accept there are idiots in this world. There are some people that are just complete idiots. You cannot reason with them. You cannot talk to them. You cannot convince them of anything because they're idiots. Or whatever in your mind is the stupidest thing you can be as a human being. You just have to accept some people are in that category. And you can't change them. You can't reason with them. Therefore, you should just ignore them. You should not let them affect what you're doing. But this, of course, is a delicate balance to find, because the ego will always take whatever you do and try to take it to an extreme. And now say, oh yeah, but Kim said I should just ignore what other people are saying. So now I don't need to listen to people anymore. But sometimes there can be people who are telling you something, giving you some feedback about your psychology, something you haven't seen in your psychology. And therefore, you need to listen to that. So then we get into this, and I remember it in myself, that was literally a period where I was almost schizophrenic because I was wondering, what should I listen to? What is a value? What is valuable feedback that can help me see something in my psychology? And what is just this hateful projections? Where's the balance to find?
Yeah, and that's the discernment, that's sort of like it's like the balance that goes with psychic projections is the Christ
Yeah, yeah,
discernment.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly you can come to a phase where you learn to be sensitive to the energy. So you sense that if there is a very negative energy behind it, you just ignore it. But there can also come a phase where you say, well, even if there is a hateful energy, does the person have a point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
And it's it's like what I can see in myself is when I was new to the spiritual path, I had more of this black and white approach where I would say, just give me a rule I can follow. So I know I'm okay if I always do this. So, for example, just ignore any negative comments.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you can flip to the other extreme and say, oh, I should listen to anything that people say because maybe they are pointing out something in my psychology. And then gradually, after some time, you find a balance where, like you said, you develop some kind of discernment. You're not closing yourself off to the fact that maybe somebody can see something in your psychology that you haven't seen yet. But on the other hand, you're not open to people just being critical. Because, and here's the difficulty with that. We all have psychology. We all have unresolved psychology. I see constantly on these YouTube videos that these people, especially in the non-duality field, they set themselves up as, now I'm a teacher because I'm awakened. I had an awakening experience. So now I'm a teacher, I can teach others. And what this means is, now I'm perfect. I have reached ego death. I'm ego free. So I don't have to look at my psychology anymore. And that's not a healthy reaction, right? Because are you still an embodiment on this planet called Earth? Okay, if you're an embodiment on Earth, you have unresolved psychology. Because otherwise you would have popped right out of here. You couldn't hold on to a physical body. So there's always something to look at. But on the other hand, you also come to a point where you realize that many times when people are negative towards you, it's because it's their unresolved psychology that they are projecting on you. They're not seeing you who you are. They're seeing this image that's filtered through their own unresolved selves. Where they are projecting that you are this way, but in reality, they are that way, or there's something in themselves that they haven't seen, so they want to put you down. So it's a very delicate balance to find. And I'm not saying that any of us can find it. We have to, it's a moving target. We have to strive to look for it. So we have to develop some ability to say, I don't need to listen to this. Or and sometimes say, oh, maybe there's a message here.
Yeah, it is. It's just.
But I actually want to go back to something you said earlier.
Yeah.
Because the overall projection when we try to do something is that if you are not perfect, you're completely wrong. Yeah. That's coming from the dark forces, right?
Yep.
And so there are people out there, as I said, there are idiots in the world who are just looking at other people to find something to criticize. Because they are threatened by the fact that you're doing something. They're threatened by the fact that you have an opinion that's different from theirs. So they just want to put you down. And they are tools for the dark forces to do this. And so you have to come to a point, at least I came to a point where I realized that the problem I was having is that I was still thinking in terms of right and wrong. In other words, even in the Summit Lighthouse, which I was a member of for 15 years, and they talked a lot about personal Christhood, they still had this idea, most people, that when you are the Christ, you are always right.
Yeah.
You're always doing the right thing. And this is the ego stream, that it can come to a point where nobody can question what you're doing. This is just the ego stream. Because in duality, in this world where everybody is in the duality consciousness, there is actually nothing that's absolutely right. As I said, anything can be criticized.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to come to a point where you're saying, I am no longer evaluating my actions based on whether they are right or wrong. Because what are you doing with these videos you're doing? You are expressing yourself as you are right now. Right now, you have a certain psychology, you have certain unresolved selves that you haven't seen, we all do. But you have a right to express yourself based on who you are right now. And you are open to seeing something in yourself and changing it. So, but what can you do other than be who you are right now? You can't say, oh, in 20 years, when I've resolved all of my psychology, then I'll start doing videos. You're talking about people who are afraid of stepping out as center master students, who are afraid of expressing themselves. Well, that's because they have this. They think you have to be perfect before you start, otherwise you'll be criticized. But as I said, you will be criticized no matter what. Deal with it. You know, and the most common problem for spiritual people, for why they aren't daring to express themselves, is they are thinking, I'll just wait a little bit. I'm not quite ready. I'm not quite perfect yet. So maybe in a year, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, maybe in the tomorrow that never comes.
Yeah, or when I've resolved this self or that self, like...
Exactly. So there comes a point where you have to decide, no, I'm going to start expressing myself right now. And that's what I decided, you know, many years ago. And I've decided it also since in various ways. Because the way I look at it is, when I express myself and I get feedback, I have a chance to look at my own reactions. Am I reacting to the feedback? So I grow much faster than by sitting in my little cave in the Himalayas where everything is under my control and therefore nobody's pushing my buttons. So I'm just saying you have to come to a point where you decide that, and this is what I did. I came to a point where I didn't claim that I was ego-free, that I was in some kind of perfect state. I just said, I have a right to be in the state of consciousness I'm in right now, with all the unresolved psychology I have. And I still have a right to express that. It's just my fundamental right to be on Earth. Because there is no cosmic law that says I have to be perfect in order to be on Earth. Look at the place. Is anybody perfect? I mean, can you find a worse planet than Earth? Maybe you can. I would prefer not to go there. But I mean, look at the mess here. I mean, to say that somebody should be perfect in order to be here is probably the most ridiculous statement you could make. And so I have a right to be here, and I have a right to express myself.
And we had to do this. Well, we had to get in the mud. And
But you see, the thing is to make that shift where you realize there's nothing wrong with you expressing yourself based on who you are right now and the psychology you have right now. As long as you're willing to look at your reactions, you know, you learn from it, you grow, you overcome it. And, you know, I started in 2002. And in the beginning, I was very hesitant about it because I came from the Summit Lighthouse where the messenger, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, she was idolized and put up on a pedestal. That she was almost perfect and had no unresolved psychology and this and that. So it was very intimidating for me to think that, could I do something similar when I wasn't as perfect as she was? And there were, of course, most people in the Summit Lighthouse rejected me outright because who is this guy? Who does he think he is? You know. And so, but I just had to decide that, well, I'm not going to be a messenger for the Summit Lighthouse. That's never been my ambition. It was not my ambition to take over her position because I realized that wasn't what I was meant to do. And so I'm just saying I had to decide that I have a right to be a messenger the way I can be a messenger, given who I am, given what psychology I have unresolved, but also given my personality. There comes a point where you have to realize that there's the outer standard that says you should be a certain way. And it denies that you have a divine individuality in your I am presence. And you have a right to express that individuality here on earth. And that individuality will not live up to the standard of the dark forces. It will be criticized. But it's nevertheless your divine right to express it. And there is nothing wrong with that individuality. So, but what I'm saying is, as spiritual people, there comes a point where we have to overcome this projection, psychic projection, black magic from the dark forces, that we should be perfect in some way. We have to realize we are individual beings and we have a right to express our individuality. And it's not a matter of evaluating, did I do something wrong, like you said? I just did what I did. Now I evaluate, could I do something different? Could I do something better? Was what I did somewhat influenced by a subconscious self, so I can see that self, overcome the self, and then I'm more free to express myself the next time. But you have at any moment, this is what I realized, at any moment, you have a right to be where you are. You have the concept of 144 levels of consciousness, right? Mm-hmm. So as you go higher and higher, there comes a point where you just have to decide, yeah, I'm not at the highest level of consciousness, but I still have a right to be at the level of consciousness I'm at, striving to go higher, and I have a right to express myself at this level of consciousness. And of course, there are things you don't see at the 76th level or the 98th level or the 120th level. There's still illusions you haven't seen through, but you have a right to express yourself based on your present level. And why? Because it will help some people.
Yeah. And also it's actually all in perfect and divine order, because that's why we came onto the earth and we descended down to such a low level of consciousness. There wouldn't have been no point. It would have been just pointless to have us come here and be perfect. Like, they just would have been like, get lost, you weirdos. But we had to go down and we have to show the way back up again.
So people can relate.
Of course, we've got to express ourselves at different, that's the whole idea of the interviews, is to capture all the different levels of consciousness as not being right or wrong, but just different perspectives. That's all it is.
Yeah. But what we also have to realize is that there is no state of perfection anywhere.
Yeah.
Even in the spiritual realm. The spiritual realm, they don't have the concept of perfection. That's created by the fallen beings in order to trip us up. Because there is always higher levels of expression, higher levels of awareness. So how can there be anything that's perfect? Perfection implies it is static, because if it's perfect, how could it improve? But see, they have said even the creator is transcending itself by creating. So there is continued ongoing self-transcendence. There is no state of perfection. We're not aiming for a state of perfection. We are aiming for a point where we can ascend from Earth, yes. But even in the ascended realm, there is growth towards higher levels of consciousness. So the whole idea of that there's some goal that we should reach, ultimate goal, that's just the ego. The ego always wants something ultimate. So, and the fallen beings are trying to attain an ultimate state as separate beings, where they think now God will have to put them in charge of the universe because they reached this ultimate state of perfection. And once you ascend, this whole thing drops away, and it can actually drop away at any point when you see it. We're not striving towards perfection. I used to when I was young, and I found Transcendental Meditation, they talk about there is cosmic consciousness, and above that is unity consciousness. And it was the ultimate state of consciousness. Now you have these non-duality teachers. Oh, this non-dual awareness, this infinite awareness, this state of non-self, that's the ultimate. It's a complete illusion. There is no ultimate state of consciousness anywhere, because you can always transcend. And so for many years, even in the summit, Christ consciousness. It was like the ultimate state of consciousness. When you are ascended, you are a perfect being when you've ascended. Well, they had a concept in the summit. You can ascend with 51% of your karma balanced.
Yeah.
I actually seriously questioned that concept. But anyway, so here you have a person, they have 49% of their karma is not balanced, which basically means they have a lot of unresolved psychology, because there's a tie, which wasn't explained in the summit, but there's a tie between your unresolved psychology and your karma. But anyway, how can that person, we may say, yeah, this person doesn't have to come back into embodiment, because it's a dispensation that you don't have to balance all of your karma before you can ascend from Earth. But you can't say that that person who ascended with 49% unbalanced karma is in the same status or same state of consciousness as the Elohim Astrea, who has been ascended for, perhaps even ascended before our sphere. You know, it makes no sense, right?
Or even other people who are still unascended, like, but who have moved up in consciousness.
Yeah, and you can't say that the ascended Master El Moria, who ascended a little over 100 years ago, is in the same state of consciousness as Alpha and Omega.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it makes no sense. So therefore, there has to be levels of growth in the ascended realm. And that's what the masters are saying. You can keep rising until you reach the greater consciousness. And then, of course, you can even go beyond that. So it's so important for us when we dare to consider expressing ourselves. We have to get rid of this idea of perfectionism. Because you have a right to be who you are. You have a right to express yourself at the level of consciousness you're at right now. And it's not a matter of, is it wrong? It is a matter of, could I transcend my state of consciousness and express myself more freely? That's fine. But it doesn't mean that what you do now is wrong. Because, you know, look at it this way. I mean, I think back, you know, I've been on the spiritual path for 48 years. I wish I kept a diary, because I know that 47 years ago, I had certain concerns and questions and this and that I've just plain forgotten. I can't remember. And I can't remember what was the insight that resolved this for me, so that I got over that hump. I can't remember that anymore. But I know there are people out there who are dealing with the same problem that I was dealing with. But I can't help them because I can't remember anymore. So it takes somebody, it's more fresh in their memory how they overcame that. Then they can say, oh, you know what, this helped me. This was what I was thinking. So, in other words, you could say that the higher you go on the levels of the 144 levels of consciousness, the fewer people you can actually help. So therefore, there's a need for people at all levels above the 48th level to express themselves and talk about their spiritual growth. And what do you see in the world? I mean, just look at YouTube, for example. There are all kinds of people who are talking about themselves and how they overcame this problem or that problem. It can be anything from how you do makeup to spiritual growth. There's such a wide variety out there. So I'm just saying, for people who are ascended master students who are hesitant about expressing themselves, you should get out more and just look at YouTube and see there are younger people out there. They don't have this hesitancy. They're just expressing themselves. So you can say that 20 or 30 years ago, when we grew up, well, in my case, it was longer, but nevertheless, there was a certain standard for how you didn't express yourself in public that we took on. But the younger generation, they're not even touched by this. So what I'm saying is, you have in your mind a sense that it would be embarrassing for you if you expressed yourself and you were not perfect. Get over it. Look at the young people. They don't have it at all. They're just expressing themselves. They don't care. You know? And so why should we? Why are we doing this? Because we have a psychic projection that we took in, and we created a subconscious self that says, oh, I can't possibly express myself because what if I'm wrong?
Yeah. Yeah, like little children. Little children don't have that. And Like,
No, and the young people today, I mean, just look at
yeah,
this. There are people expressing all kinds of things.
yeah,
So you need to look at what is the mechanism in you that prevents you from, so to speak, coming out of the closet, because many ascended master students are in the closet about their spirituality, just as it used to be that homosexuals were in the closet about their sexuality. So when you come out of the closet, what is it that's keeping you in the closet? What is it in you? What belief do you have that's preventing you from blossoming? So opening that door and saying, hey, here I am, like it or not.
yeah,
What was it we said with when we were playing hide and seek as children? Here I come, ready or not.
yeah.
That's what we need to say to the world. Whether the world is ready or not, here I come.
Yeah. Well, like I literally, well, yeah, had to come out of the closet, like, because, I lived a homosexual life, and, but, and it was all of the projections that, that is wrong, it's bad, it's wrong, and, that's what keeps you behind. So I can see actually, I'm just actually looking at, oh, this like another lovely layer of what a great experience it was, for me to learn how to open that door and just be like, oh, fuck it, this is who I am,
Yeah,
or who I think
yeah.
I am, at least in this moment, and then I can drop that costume as well.
Yeah, because,
Yeah.
basically you can say that we have two choices. We can suppress something or we can express it. Suppress or express. If you suppress, you are guaranteed not to get over it. That's the thing about suppression and denial. You're not going to resolve psychology by suppressing it. I mean, that has been proven by billions of people over history. But basically you can say, what was it? If I look back at my parents' generation, right? The way they were brought up in society back then, there was no awareness of resolving psychology. And you had to be crazy to go and see a psychologist.
Yeah.
And today, young people are talking about, oh, I need to resolve this in my psychology. I need to do this. I need to do that. But so what were people taught in my grandparents and my parents' generation? Have a psychological problem, suppress it. So that means you talked about earlier about the culture and the psychic projections. So what was the psychic projection against people? Suppress any psychological issue, and it'll probably go away. It didn't go away, of course, right? So people got angry, they got disappointed, they got bitter throughout life. Some people started drinking to deal with the pain. So suppression doesn't help anything. But when you express it, you have a chance to deal with it. And then you can resolve it, and then you grow. So you can, in my view, if you're looking to grow, you can never lose by expressing yourself. Because it's always an opportunity to grow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a key initiation, really, like just to be able to take this step and dare to be free, dare to express yourself. But yeah.
Because that's
So
the basic projection from the dark forces is don't come out of the closet. You can stay in the closet and you can give your degrees, you can study spiritual teachings, you can strive to raise your consciousness. Don't come out of the closet. That domain outside the closet, this is ours. We own that. We own the world. This is essentially what they're projecting at us. So you can be spiritual as long as you don't express it in the world. Because if you do, we're going to come after you with everything we've got. And the challenge is to come to a point where you realize they don't have anything at all, except maybe what you have unresolved in your psychology. So if you resolve that, they've got nothing.
yeah, when it all boils down to it, that's all it is. Like, it's only if there's a reaction in the self that'll.
Well, we're talking about psychic projections, right?
Yeah.
And so what, if you're talking about, as I said, there's a difference between the physical and the psychic realm, right? So somebody can physically imprison you. Yes, of course. But what the dark forces are trying to do is psychically imprison us so that we voluntarily create boundaries for what we dare to express in the world. And what we have to realize is if somebody physically puts you in prison, you can't just break out of there. But whatever psychological prison you are in, you can break out of it. Why? Because you damn well created it yourself in past lifetimes. You didn't know what you were doing, but by using the teachings and tools of the Ascended Masters, you can become aware of what you did, and you can systematically undo it, step by step by step. And there will come that point where the principle of this world cometh and has nothing in you.
That's, yeah. And that's exactly, yeah, the goal I've got. I know that for sure. Like, to let it all drop away. Hey, Kim, we've talked for a long time. People are going to need like boxes of popcorn to watch this, I think. It's gone on for a while. So anyway, I'll sort of leave it. Yeah, we'll leave it here. And but yeah, I just want to thank you.
But did we
so
cover
much.
everything you wanted to cover?
Oh, there's more, but you know, it's all good. I'll be talking with you later, so you know, we'll probably sort of get onto some different themes with her. So anyway, thanks so much, and have a great conference in America.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.